we are generally talking about those intentions which are clearly felt in all the actions of Trump and Putin in a very clear manner. Putin, in his own way, is of course more logical, as he is a sadist, and he is logical in his consistent in his sadism, much more consistent than Trump in his uncontrollable artistry. But if you look at the situation not through some Trump's magical lens, it's easy to notice that Putin, of course, intends to skillfully outmaneuver old Donald. He is seemingly luring the American president deeper and more into what can only be described as the rather foolish so-called role of the infamous peacemaker failure known as Britain the Boaster. And when the abscess of today's hysterical peacemaking finally bursts, in a world where the consequences of such actions are often unpredictable and, unfortunately, of course, the biggest fool will be Trump. For Putin, I repeat, the world is deadly, shameful, absurd, and he will not allow it in any form. All of this is obvious, and by a number of direct signs and omens, but also by indirect secondary signs and testimonies. It is also clear that there is not a single thought about peace in the Kremlin's minds. It is completely obvious that the cauldron in which the bloody Kremlin freaks brew their Russian poison, the world, is boiling, and the concentration of poison in it and the overall temperature of the concoction only continue to rise and rise. But besides that, everyone knows that new brigades and divisions are being feverishly formed of the Orkney army. The open planning of a network of FSB theorems for the enemies of the war is underway. In addition, another wave of raids on anti-war elements, enemies of the people, has begun. They are even rounding up in general such respectable, long-silenced individuals, non-media, non-resonant individuals like the kind Barabash, the long-repentant Mengazov, and indeed, unfortunately, the long-silenced Poloskova, such as the very same poetess. In colonies and prisons, war propaganda has been tripled and promises of fabulous benefits for participants of the special military operation. In the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, an order from Minister Belousov is being distributed to all units to ruthlessly punish for treacherous talks about peace. All of this hardly resembles preparation for pacification, a truce, or a change of direction. And in Russia itself, this degradation of the people is happening at some kind of cosmic speed, because the intellectuals who at the very beginning of the war were still trying to express something anti-war have made up their minds and all got involved. Rolling up their sleeves, they started writing denunciations, like, for example, the director of the gymnasium in Severodvinsk, Podolskaya, who reported on her own children. Only because exactly on February 24th, the date of the anniversary of the full-scale invasion, the event of Russia into Ukraine, in the stall of the women's restroom of gymnasium number 14, there was a small envelope with several candles and a note with anti-war content. What do you think the headmistress, who at the beginning of the war, according to those who knew her, in private conversations she wanted and stated that all this is a crime, immediately the headmistress called the police and the FSB. Yes, despite what we see, a real readiness for peace, this is always and inevitably the drop of military hysteria and some easing of repressions, a demonstration of somewhat returning to adequacy. As it disappears in the case of a truce or peace, the point of crushing the anti-war activists disappears. In the case of a truce, Kremlin sadism towards everyone who dared to disagree with the criminal invasion and occupation of Ukraine is explained only by the fear that, practically speaking, these very individuals who disagree could become the backbone of a real anti-war movement, which would truly have a solid multi-million potential in Russia and would be capable of, to a large extent, if not paralyze, then at least hinder the Kremlin's madness and possibly balance the forces with the zealots. Nevertheless, of course, in the event of the war ending or a refusal to continue it, such measures as are being demonstrated now, that is the escalation of counteraction against all anti-war activists, these measures become pointless and ideally should be quickly rolled back. But as we see in the Russian Federation, everything is completely different. And state bodies, including the education system, medical professionals, psychologists, what did I report to you about recently? In the extract releases, strictly oriented through the internal guidelines of their ministries and various new laws, to identify and imprison unreliable individuals and opponents of the war, never mind the manipulations with Korean military equipment and the new Korean infantry that certainly arrived in Ukraine to replace the already completely vanquished demons. All of this could be attributed to early agreements, but everything happening within Russia itself in other areas, which are now directly in a state of relevance and continuity, receiving instructions from the ministries, and the Kremlin only indicates that Putin will wage war forever, forever, until that very thing, Trump's magic point, will not ignite with hellfire and will not even intoxicate the Kremlin monkey, which in general has relieved it.